The wilderness, it calls to us, right? It's vast, beautiful, just full of secrets. But what if some of those secrets aren't just unknown, but, well, truly dark, terrifying even, leaving this indelible mark on anyone who stumbles upon them? Today we're kind of venturing into those shadows. We're exploring a chilling collection of true accounts, straight from park rangers across the U.S. and Europe. And these aren't just campfire tales, you know. These are deeply personal experiences, things that happened, unexpected and horrific, right in the middle of all that natural beauty. So our mission for this deep dive, we're going to explore these unsettling narratives, pull out the most impactful details, and really grapple with the mysteries they leave behind. We're committed to telling these stories in a captivating, thought-provoking way, but we also acknowledge they're serious, often pretty somber. So get ready. Our first story kicks off with a really gruesome discovery. All right, this first account comes from Roger. He's a retired forest ranger from Minnesota, spent the better part of 3 decades working for the U.S. Forest Service law enforcement. Roger shares these because, as he puts it, some experiences
these need to be shared, you know.
Yeah.
Now, for most of his career, Roger was posted up in Voyageurs National Park. That's right near the Canadian border. The park is split by these big lakes, popular with fishermen, kayakers, that sort of thing. And the lakes are dotted with these small islands. A lot of them are popular camping spots. People go to Voyageurs to escape the city, right?
Mm-hmm.
For privacy. And you can't get much more private than your own little island out there. So, one afternoon, Roger gets a call from his chief ranger. The International Falls Police Department, it's a small border city just west of the park. They'd received a missing persons report. A woman's husband went camping with an old friend and they were overdue. Roger was asked to just check their usual spot on Wolf Island. Now, the ranger team at Voyageurs are one of the most amphibious in the country, really comfortable with motorboats, kayaks, you name it. So Roger heads to the Ash River Visitor Center to get his boat ready. But just as he's about to set off, he gets a second call. Urgent this time. The missing man's son had called in. Heads up, really. Warning law enforcement that his father was most likely armed and had been acting extremely erratically before the trip. Now, Roger, being on the law enforcement side, he was equipped for this kind of thing. But still, he felt this growing sense of apprehension. You know, 9 times out of 10, park incidents are resolved pretty quickly, peacefully. But it's that 1 in 10, that's the one that haunts you. Anyway, after prepping his boat, Roger sailed out. Took about 20-25 minutes until he spotted Wolf Island. From a safe distance, he could see this faint plume of smoke coming from the eastern side. He did have a bullhorn with him, so he had to bring the boat in closer, maybe 20 or 30 feet from shore, and just call out, using his own voice. He called once, then twice. After a third call and still no response, he decided he needed to make landfall, get eyes on that campfire.
And right there, Roger's mindset shifts instantly, doesn't it? From a standard missing persons check to, well, potentially walking into a dangerous, possibly violent situation. It really highlights this silent psychological battle rangers face. They're not just dealing with nature, they're dealing with human nature, often in extreme isolation. That isolation, it's beautiful, but it can magnify the horror of something terrible. It turns this remote beauty into potentially a stage for the utterly inexplicable. It's a burden few really grasp.
So Roger wades ashore. He's still calling out the whole time. He can smell the campfire, definitely, and something cooking. He figures whoever made camp must be nearby, but nobody calls back. He doesn't see anyone as he walks up the beach. Maybe they moved on. But as he walks further onto the island, something catches his eye. He says he remembers it like a photograph, just frozen in his mind. He saw a raven landing, joining other ravens, and then he saw what it was landing on. A man, slumped in a camping chair. Not quite upright, but not fully slouched either. And there was a big old hole in the upper rear portion of his skull. One raven was actually pushing its beak into the hole. Others were fighting over. Whatever had leaked onto the ground. So that's one of the missing campers. Roger didn't have to wait long to find the second one. Lying motionless right next to the campfire was what was left of the other guy. Someone had, well, they cut off his legs, presumably after he was already dead, and cut them into small sections and put them onto the fire. That smell Roger noticed coming in. It weren't lunch. It was a piece of the second camper's leg, sizzling on the dying embers. The conclusion they reached was,
well, the guy in the chair probably couldn't bring himself to finish disposing of his friend, and decided to take his own life instead. They never found out why. Roger said there were no affairs or betrayals or anything else that might explain it, just one big mystery. Yeah.
Wow.
Roger's description, the ravens, the Uskins, the sheer lack of reason behind it all, it paints such a horrifying picture. From your perspective, what's the psychological toll when rangers face something like that? Evil that just defies any logical explanation, especially out there, so isolated.
That's a really crucial point. When there is no clear motive, right? No sense of closure, the mystery itself becomes this heavy psychological weight. These kinds of isolated incidents, particularly the ones without a clear why, force rangers to confront this profound, almost existential darkness. It goes beyond just law enforcement. It's about grappling with the truly unfathomable, and that leaves a mark, a deep one. It can haunt someone for decades.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. From that kind of raw, inexplicable violence, we move to a different kind of encounter, one that really highlights the sometimes frustrating realities of justice. Our next story comes from a volunteer seasonal ranger. This was at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And it really shows the gap between, the romantic idea of being a ranger and the administrative side of things that can sometimes, get in the way. This volunteer's duties were pretty standard, staffing the visitor center or doing boundary maintenance, which they said was basically a fancy name for checking fences. Part of that was checking near Cosby Creek and the Tritt Cemetery, making sure wildlife wasn't digging up old bones, that sort of thing. It was on one of these fence checks near Cosby Creek that this ranger saw something they'd never forget. They were walking east along the fence line, and suddenly they see someone moving through the trees up ahead. The second they saw her, they felt this weird doubt, like, this can't be real. It was a girl, barefoot, completely without clothes, and big patches of her skin were missing, revealing all this clotted blood and dried gore underneath. Just almost every part of her, hair to toes, covered in blood. She was just softly sobbing as she walked, clearly exhausted, running on fumes. The ranger didn't hesitate. Rushed right over her, the girl just collapsed into the dirt. They took off their own shirt, used it to cover her up as best they could. They picked her up, carried her back to their truck. It was lucky, really, that she was found so close to where the truck is parked. The ranger knew there was an urgent care in Newport, about 12 miles north. So they drove, fast as they could, telling the girl, don't close your eyes, you gotta stay awake. And she did. Kept her eyes wide open the whole way, but never made a sound. Just lay there, curled up in the shirt, until they got to the urgent care.
The trauma that girl must have experienced, it's just unimaginable, but she was still moving, still somehow fighting. And the ranger's response, so quick, compassionate, putting immediate help first, it's a real testament to that human instinct in a crisis. It also shows how suddenly things can change out there. 1 minute, you're checking fences. The next, it's a life or death rescue.
Yeah. So after some initial treatment at urgent care, the girl was transferred to a general hospital in Sevierville. It had a proper emergency room. And that's pretty much where the ranger's direct involvement ended. They asked if they could help more, but were told, go back, report to the chief ranger. When the ranger got back to HQ, covered in blood, their coworkers thought they were the one hurt. The ranger had to say, it's not my blood, before explaining everything. Now, since the rangers had jurisdiction, only the FBI could really take over. But first, they needed to talk to the girl. Find out what happened. But when the chief contacted the hospital, they learned she hadn't said a single word. Not to doctors, nurses, not to anyone. Which, wasn't immediately seen as super unusual given the trauma, so they waited. But the next day, still nothing. The girl refused to speak. The chief and the volunteer ranger decided to drive to the hospital. Maybe seeing the ranger again might help her open up. They talked on the way about how the investigation might go, completely unaware that, there wasn't going to be one. When they got to the hospital, chaos. The nursing staff was in a panic. The hospital had lost their victim. Security footage showed a man, dressed in hospital scrubs, pushing a wheelchair right through the main entrance. He had some kind of ID clip, talked his way up at reception, went straight to the girl's room, loaded her into the wheelchair, and just pushed her out. Nobody stopped him. A potential abduction. They immediately called the FBI. The main worry was that the abductor was the same person, or part of the same group, that hurt her in the first place. The FBI took over. But about a month later, the chief found out the case wasn't exactly a priority for them. Some desk jockey somewhere, as a ranger put it, decided it wasn't worth pursuing. Why? Because the only charges they could likely bring were for impersonating a healthcare professional, not assault, not kidnapping. Without the girl's testimony, there was no hard evidence for the serious crimes, just theories, assumptions. So the case was closed. Just closed. A traumatized child is abducted from a hospital and the case gets shelved because of a legal technicality. That feels like a huge betrayal. Is that something you see often? Where the system struggles because there's no straightforward testimony and perpetrators just walk?
Unfortunately, yes. This case is such a stark example of how bureaucratic systems, even though they're designed for clarity, can sometimes inadvertently lead to injustice. The girl's silence, completely understandable given her trauma, ironically became the barrier to holding someone accountable. It really exposes the limits of a system that often needs clear, provable facts. It lets monsters slip through the cracks when cases are unusual or emotionally charged like this. And for the people on the ground, the rangers, it leaves this deep, deep sense of disillusionment.
Yeah, you can feel it in the ranger's words. That feeling that justice sits behind a desk, wears a suit and a tie, and has just grown cold, callous, and uncaring. It led them to this really chilling realization. Monsters are always going to exist, whether we like it or not. Okay, our next story takes us to Idaho, Kaniksu National Park. This comes from a medically retired ranger who worked there for 7 years, between 85 and 92. Kaniksu is rugged country. Forests, mountains, lakes. You've got the Kootenai River up north, Lake Pendore south, surrounded by ridges and valleys. It was this ranger's very last day on the job. They were walking through one of those valleys, just doing routine duties. Suddenly, they felt what they described as prime Mike Tyson punching me on the right side of my hip. The force just spun them around, took their legs right out from under them, and as they were falling, they heard the crack of a rifle coming from up the valley. Their first thought, accident, hunter's mistake, maybe. Even though there were regulations against hunting there, they couldn't see the shooters that started yelling, "Don't shoot, I'm a ranger."
One hand pressing the wound, the other waving like crazy. They expected someone to appear, horrified, right? But instead, another shot. The bullet hit the dirt just inches in front of them, missed narrowly. Instantly, they rolled behind the only cover available, a rotting log, barely long enough to cover their body. Even then, they couldn't quite believe someone was deliberately shooting at a forest ranger. They tried yelling again, "I'm friendly, stop shooting." The response, a bullet slammed into the log. It didn't go through, but the ranger realized, they could just blow the log apart. And only then did the terrifying reality sink in. This was intentional.
That ranger's quick thinking under fire is incredible. Survival instincts just took over immediately. Assessing the threat, figuring out an escape. This incident really underscores the unpredictable violence that can just erupt, even in places that seem peaceful. It highlights how park protectors themselves can become targets, sometimes for reasons totally disconnected from their actual job.
Absolutely. So before rolling onto their front, the ranger checked if their legs still worked enough to run. They did. They aimed their body towards where your truck was parked. The shooter didn't fire, just watching, waiting. The ranger knew they had to do something. Make the shooter flinch, create an opening. All they had was their sidearm. So they fired a few rounds over the log, then got up and just sprinted. Ran through the trees, firing wildly behind them as they went. Heard one last crack, a bullet whizzing just over their head. But somehow they ran far enough, fast enough, broke the line of sight, made it back to their truck alive. Ranger HQ was too far, so they drove straight to the emergency room in Sandpoint. A doctor later told them they were incredibly lucky. Where the bullet hit, its path through the hip. Any further left, they couldn't have run. Any further down, it could have hit the femoral artery. Fatal. Because it was federal land, the FBI got involved, joined the ranger team, scouring the park for the shooter. But whoever it was, they were long gone. The FBI took it very seriously, interviewed the ranger extensively, had dogs out there for weeks looking for boot prints, casings, anything. Found nothing, except that the rifle was a Remington Model 700. During the final interview, one agent shared the prevailing theory. Couldn't rule out a random hunter, sure, but there was another angle. Just months before this shooting, the infamous Ruby Ridge incident happened. That 11-day standoff between U.S. Marshals and Randy Weaver ended with Weaver's dog, son, and wife dead. The FBI agent speculated, well, since the ranger was a federal employee, a representative of the government, maybe some wacko with a hunting rifle saw them as a target. Revenge for Ruby Ridge. They never caught the shooter. As far as the ranger knows, they're still out there. And the ranger still lives with a trauma, needs a second hip surgery. The sheer audacity of it, right? A targeted attack on a ranger, possibly linked to this larger politically charged event. It makes you think about the ongoing risks these folks face. How does something like that, unresolved and targeted, affect the sense of security for people protecting federal lands?
Oh, it creates this profound, lingering vulnerability. Absolutely. When the attacker isn't caught, the unknown just becomes this constant shadow. This isn't just about one person's injury. It's a stark reminder that these wild spaces can suddenly become battlegrounds where the personal and the political just tragically collide. It definitely impacts morale, safety protocols across the whole federal service, because it shows that even doing a quiet job, you can get caught in the crossfire of much bigger conflicts.
Okay, for our final story today, we have a deeply personal account. It's from a female ranger, and it starts with her own difficult journey, divorce, infertility, and how she found a new purpose in the Forest Service. After a really heartbreaking divorce, she found peace hiking woodland trails. That eventually led her to apply to the Forest Service. She interned for 2 years up at Acadia National Park in Maine, far away from painful memories, a chance for a fresh start. By the fall of 1994, she was a full ranger on the Acadia team, proud of her work, but still feeling, as she put it, a baby-sized hole in her life. Fast forward to June 1995. She's doing a land inspection near a rocky hill called Connor's Nubble, On her way back to HQ, she decides to take a shortcut near Eagle Lake. Not a well-used path. She'd never taken it before. Walking through the undergrowth, her foot catches on something. She stumbles. Annoyed, she kicks away some shrubs, expecting just a rock. But instead, she sees something with a seam, like a box, no bigger than a shoebox. It looked like it had been buried a long, long time. She made a mental note of the spot, kept going. A few days later, had some spare time, decided to go back and dig it up. Took about an hour, hard work, sweaty. Finally unearthed the box. She admitted she was pretty excited, thinking, maybe treasure. Never thought it could be anything sinister. But when she opened that box, lifted a piece of rotten cloth, she gasped. Slammed the lid shut. It wasn't gold. It wasn't a weapon. It was a skeleton. The tiny, newly formed skeleton of a departed newborn baby. She ran back to HQ immediately. Soon the place was swarming. Rangers, state troopers, a forensics team. Before they taped it off, the chief ranger looked inside, confirmed what she saw, but also noted the skeleton looked all wrong. Skull seemed too big, arms too long. But genetic testing later confirmed entirely human. Forensic analysis pieced together a sad story. Sometime between 1920 and 1930, a mother gave birth to a child with a genetic disorder, something causing an unusually large skull macrocephaly, maybe Weaver's or Soto syndrome. Today, those are often treatable, but back then, devastating, often led to early death. There were no signs of trauma, so maybe the baby died naturally, or maybe someone ended its suffering. We don't know. Then the child was placed in this surprisingly expensive felt-lined box and buried deep in the woods, not given a proper funeral. Decades later, a slow green tree root pushed the box closer to the surface until the ranger tripped over it. The FBI's DNA unit tried but couldn't find any match to distant relatives. This child had no name, no date of birth. Its only possession was that small, improvised coffin. But for the ranger who found it, this wasn't just a sad story. She said in her darkest moments, she felt like that poor baby was her own. She felt it was this strange kind of destiny that led her specifically to stumble on that box. As someone unable to have children herself, she found this profound meaning in giving the nameless child a proper burial. It gave her, she said, a taste of how boundless and unconditional a mother's love can be. That connection she felt, it's really striking, isn't it? A deep personal link to this unknown child from decades ago. What does that tell us about our need for connection, even in these really unexpected, somber situations?
Yeah, incredibly poignant. Yeah. It's a beautiful, if sad, example of how these deep human needs can find fulfillment in the most unexpected ways. Her story really illustrates the depth of empathy we're capable of and how we find meaning even when facing loss, even if it's not directly our own loss. It speaks to that fundamental desire we have to nurture, to connect, and how an act of compassion, even for a long departed stranger, can bring this deep sense of purpose, maybe even healing.
From that personal discovery in Maine, let's journey across the Atlantic now, to a decades-long mystery in Spain, finally brought to a chilling conclusion in the Picos de Europa National Park. This is a mountainous reserve in northern Spain, known for its beauty, green forests, clear lakes, snow-capped mountains, but also for its dangers. Freak snowstorms, brown bears, wolves, wild boars. Back in 1945, a 31-year-old man named Eloy Perez wasn't just a forest ranger there. He was also the elected mayor of a nearby town. Now, Spain had just come out of its civil war. Franco, the fascist dictator, was in power. Many anti-fascist resistance fighters, guerrillas, had hidden out in wilderness areas like Picos de Europa. Eloy knew many of them. Some were old friends, even relatives. He clearly sympathized with them. But as mayor, he also had obligations to Franco's regime. So he was stuck, right? Betray his country or betray his friends. He tried to stay neutral, paid lip service to the regime, but kept quiet about the guerrillas' locations, trying to keep his town safe. But then, with Nazi Germany collapsing, the guerrillas in Picos de Europa started ramping things up, ambushing Spanish civil guard units, even trying to make explosives. This was incredibly risky. It threatened to bring Franco's full force down on Eloy's town. So mid-April 1945, Eloy decides to arrange a meeting, a parley, with an old friend, Juan Fernandez Ayala, 27 years old, now second in command of the local resistance. Eloy hoped he could convince them to cool it, avert a bigger conflict. On Sunday, April 15, 1945, Eloy walks deep into the wilderness, to an old abandoned villa where Juan and his group are waiting. Eloy pleads his case. He explains that escalating violence could destroy the very place they all called home. As they're listening, they suddenly hear footsteps outside. Turns out, 2 days before, Eloy had confided in another park ranger about the meeting. This ranger, Alfonso Martinez, Eloy clearly trusted him. But the night before the meeting, Alfonso betrayed Eloy, told the Spanish civil guard, those footsteps. Not more guerrillas. It was a heavily armed troop of civil guard planning to kill everyone there. But the guerrillas were smart. They picked the villa because it was defensible. They ambushed the approaching guards, killed 2, pinned down the rest, forced them to retreat. The guerrillas used the chaos to flee, looting the dead fascists first, then vanished into the mountains. Eloy ran all the way back to his town, just waiting for that inevitable knock on his door. When the knock came, it wasn't the guard, it was Juan. After the firefight, the guerrillas had found loot on the dead guardsmen, including a folded piece of paper, their orders. The note named Eloy's fellow ranger, Alfonso Martinez, as their informant, and mentioned a possible unnamed primary source. Given how few rangers worked there, the guerrillas quickly figured out the primary source must have been Eloy himself. So April 24th, 1945, Eloy is marched up into the mountains to a top-secret guerrilla HQ, interrogated intensely. What happened next is speculation, mostly. But months later, a captured guerrilla claimed he knew. Said he saw Juan walking Eloy into the jungle. Both seemed relaxed. Juan telling his old friend it would be okay. Moments later, a single gunshot. Juan returned alone. Juan Fernandez Ayala himself was killed in a shootout 12 years later, taking the secret of Eloy's grave with him. Eloy's family eventually just had to accept he was never coming home. But as Walt Whitman wrote, nothing is ever really lost, right? Fast forward. Summer of 2018. A team of professional cavers, funded by the EU and Spain to search for Civil War missing, are exploring caves on the eastern side of Picos de Europa. They reach the entrance of a cave called Tor de Topor, descend almost 200 meters deep. At the bottom, amongst mud and debris, they find human bones. DNA from skull and jawbone fragments match samples from Eloy's living relatives. After nearly 75 years missing, Eloy Cilio Perez was found. His daughter Mercedes, now 75 herself, hiked out to pay her respects, camped near the cave. Investigators determined Eloy was executed, single shot from a 9mm Astra 400 handgun, the same type found on Juan Fernandez Ayala when he died. But the chilling part, it didn't end there. As Spanish authorities were reconstructing Eloy's skeleton that summer, they realized Eloy wasn't alone down there. They started piecing together a second skeleton. Details emerged. Female, aged 10 to 14 years old. And she hadn't died with Eloy. She died sometime between 5 and 15 years after him. Initially, investigators thought maybe a local shepherd girl fell in accidentally. But that was quickly dismissed by a renowned forensic anthropologist, Dr. Fernando Culia. Dr. Culia's analysis suggested she couldn't have been a rural shepherd. Her bones showed a diet high in low-fat animal protein, more typical of the populous Cantabrian coast nearby, not the corn-heavy diet of the rural mountains. Dr. Cooley even analyzed her DNA to create a description. About 4'8", green eyes, dark brown hair. They circulated this description widely. Sadly, no one came forward with any useful information. Maybe the closest they got to a break was learning something about Picos de Europa back then. After Franco took power, lots of innocent people disappeared. Not all were killed or joined the resistance, some just went off the grid. Lived in remote mountain areas, maybe undocumented miners, avoiding authorities completely. If someone in their hidden community went missing, they wouldn't go to the police. They'd fear being discovered themselves. Okay, so this second skeleton, found years after Eloy, raises so many questions. Theories range from this freak accidental fall to something much darker, like a sick parody of a funeral. How do investigators even begin to tackle mysteries like this, so open-ended, almost cinematic, with such limited evidence?
It's an immense challenge, yeah. It relies heavily on meticulous forensic work like Dr. Culia's and really understanding the historical context, like those off-grid communities. What's fascinating here is how the cave itself acted as this silent witness, right? Preserving details that decades of human memory lost. They recovered less than 20% of the girl's skeletons. The exact cause of death is still unknown. But the findings are weird. She fell almost straight down that 180-meter shaft, yet only a few bones showed signs of high-impact trauma. Her femur, her jaw, intact. Just small parts of her skull had significant damage. So two main theories remain. One, pure accident. By some bizarre physical fluke, she only fractures her skull after a nearly 200-meter fall into rock. Highly unlikely, but possible. Two, she was murdered, killed by a blow to the head first, and then someone lowered her body gently into the cave. Someone with, as they put it, twisted affection, like a sick parody of a funeral. As of June 2022, the identity of this Topper Jane Doe is still a mystery. Her DNA is in the Phoenix database, Spain's national system for missing persons, but no match yet.
Incredibly poignant ending, though. Eloy Cilio Perez's remains were returned to his family, laid to rest in the cemetery of the town he died trying to protect. And his daughter, Mercedes, made sure the Topper Jane Doe was buried right beside him. She said, "It wouldn't be fair to separate them now, after all those years together in the dark cave." Wow, what an incredible journey through these profound, often terrifying secrets hidden in the wild places we think we know. From truly gruesome discoveries and frustrating bureaucratic walls to targeted attacks and mysteries buried for decades, these stories show the lasting impact these encounters have.
Absolutely. These deep dives constantly remind us that the monsters we fear aren't always what we imagine. Sometimes they're very human. Sometimes they're just the indifference of nature, or even the failings of systems meant to protect us. It shows that even the most beautiful, seemingly peaceful landscapes can hold some deeply unsettling truths just beneath the surface, waiting.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it, what other unknown horrors might still lurk out there beneath the surface of our world? And how prepared are we really to face them? It's a question that definitely stays with you. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. If you found these stories as compelling and, frankly, chilling as we did, please consider sharing this with others who appreciate these kinds of narratives. And hey, don't forget to subscribe to the Deep Dive for more explorations into hidden knowledge and surprising facts. Your engagement really helps us keep bringing these curated deep dives to you.